Well, we do continue our service, our series called Unwrapping Christmas, and today we're going to talk about this idea of like what does the unwanted gift look like, and what do we do with those? How many of you have had the joy to experience the white elephant gift exchange, like live and in person? Right? Yeah. This is an interesting little tradition we have where we all go and find the most random piece of junk in our house, right? Or that we can find at the store for less than $10, and we put it in a box. And what's interesting, we were at one at a friend's house. Like I've done them at like corporate things and like church events and stuff. We went to a friend's house, and he's like, "Let's do a white elephant exchange." I'm like, "Okay, this will be interesting." And so it goes around, and we're picking presents. And what's interesting about that process and about the time we did it at our friend's house was the random things, like you would open something, somebody would open something, and everybody would go, "Oh." But there was always one person, for almost every present, who was like, "Oh." It's amazing like how relative, things are. And I remember that somebody early on picked up something, and they'd picked out this. It was in a plastic container, and it was a knife set. I'm not entirely sure what it was for, but it had a really nice-looking knife sharpener in it, and mine had just broke. And if you don't know, in White Elephant Gifts Exchange, you can like steal from people, right? But things can only be stolen so many times. So I was kind of later in the selection process, and this came up kind of early. So it's one of those things where you're just watching it, and you're just like making eyes. Everybody else in the room is like, "Does anybody else want this thing? Because I don't know how this is going to go." And it did actually get stolen once, and then by the time it came to me, to my turn, you can either open a present or you can steal. And so there were only a couple presents left, and I'm like, I'm going to steal that because that means it's stolen twice and no one can take it from me. That knife set is mine. All right. And I do it. I get it. I'm so happy. And my wife is looking at me like, "Why do you want that? What are you so excited about?" And that's the truth. The truth is what is a gift? What is a blessing for one person may not look like a blessing to somebody else, right? Oftentimes, what is and is not a blessing has more to do with our frame of mind. It has more to do with how we think about something and how we feel about something than the something itself. So I'm going to give you a couple little examples so you can really kind of understand what this looks like. So if we were to go to lunch together after this, and I were to offer you these, oysters on the half shell. All right. Yeah, see? Half of you were like, "Oh, man." And half, all right, blessing? Who's in the blessing category with those? All right. Not me, by the way. That's the foulest thing I've ever seen. And according to Leviticus, eating them is a sin. That's true. Look it up. All right. Right. Because it's relative, right? I mean, I'm like, why would you do that? While some of you are like, that's the most awesome thing that has ever happened. So, all right. So one more test in another genre. For one more thing, we got a ticket here to a Patriots football game. Yeah. See, did it again. Some of you were in the blessing camp. Not me, by the way. Sorry. Some of you not so much, right? It's oftentimes what is a blessing and what is not a blessing is a matter of how we think about it, how we approach it, and how we understand, what is going on, right? And that's really essential to understand the story of Mary and what's really going on with Mary. Now, for this series, we're going back and forth between Luke's gospel and Matthew's gospel, which both tell the story of the birth of Jesus, but both include different details, right? So they kind of focus on different things. So we're back in Luke's gospel. And Luke's gospel, you remember, was the one that begins not with Mary and Joseph, but begins with Zachariah and Elizabeth, right? There are actually two pretty amazing births in Luke's gospel. And the first is John the Baptist, born to Zachariah and Elizabeth. And then the second one is Mary. Now, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I know, all the way to a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about it, Zachariah and Elizabeth, they were people who everyone, looked at with respect. They had respect in the community. He was in the priestly class. He got to go to the temple and do the thing. He got to hang out in the holiest of holy spots that almost nobody ever got to go to. Luke makes sure that we understand that these are good, upright, wonderful folks, right? Who had happened to never in their lives so far, even though they're actually both quite old at this point, we don't know how old, but they're old, had never had children. And of course, children were considered a blessing at this time. And so along come these, yeah.
That perked my son up.
And still are.
Man, I'm going to pay for that later. All right.
Anywho, bring it back. So you get Zachariah and Elizabeth, right? And so, and quite the opposite is true. The inability to have children, was really kind of that was not only sad for them, but not really looked down on. But everyone would kind of go, oh, that's just too bad, right? And it was kind of a pitiable condition. And so we've got these two folks. And so when the angel comes and says, hey, you two are going to have a kid, everyone would have agreed that was a really good thing. Everyone agreed that was miraculous. Everybody would have immediately thought of Abraham and Sarah, right, who were in the very same situation. And that's what we're meant to think of when we read that story. And so it is a blessing, and it's an undisputed blessing. Zachariah and Elizabeth thought it was a blessing. I'm sure all their friends thought it was a blessing. Here, good, look, you finally get to have kids. How wonderful is this? We didn't know this was even possible. Everyone thought, that's great. And then we move from that story immediately into this other story about another couple. A couple that's not even married yet, a couple who's starting out in life, a couple who are both probably very young, Mary being much younger than we want to know that Mary is. By tradition of the day, probably somewhere between 12 and 13 years old. Like that's what they did 2,000 years ago, says the father of a daughter. Just saying. So you got this other couple, and so they're of course looking forward to life, and they're looking forward to how life goes together. And again, when we talked about Joseph, right? Mary's got this plan in her head. She knows how things are supposed to go, and so when this angel shows up and says there's going to be yet another miraculous baby who's going to come about in a way that isn't typically done, it's almost the exact opposite situation of what Zachariah and Elizabeth were dealing with. Everybody would have looked at what happened at Zachariah and Elizabeth as something amazing. Everybody who is not Mary and Joseph, basically everybody who didn't get to have a chat with an angel, which is very, very few people, everybody who's not them is going to look at this not as a blessing, not as something good that happened, but as a burden, right? Those of us who grew up in small towns know how small towns are and how small towns talk and how small towns gossip, right? Modern towns, small towns, have nothing on small towns of 2,000 years ago. Because you understand, 2,000 years ago, you had small towns who for where everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everybody's business, and they didn't have cable TV, Twitter, or their Kardashians to distract them. Right? There's nothing to gossip about, there's nothing to talk about except what's going on. And of course, people have to spend a lot more time together because the laundry's all done at the river. A lot of the cooking is done communally. So it's not like Mary and Joseph can hide what is going on, right? Everyone will know, and people will talk about it. And so Mary grew up in this. Mary knows this. So when Mary says, okay, angel, here I am. I'm willing to do this. I always like that song, Mary, Did You Know, right? Well, the verse is missing is, Mary, did you know that they were going to call you names behind your back? Mary, did you know that they were going to look down on you? Mary, did you know that the best people would probably be able to muster is pity for your situation, especially in those early years? The angel comes and says, here's this great blessing. Here's this wonderful thing that I want you to do. Well, all we have to do is fast forward into the story and know where that blessing goes, right? What does this blessing mean? Well, part of what it means is, if we switch back to Matthew's Gospels, is they're going to have to run away for a while. They're going to have to run to Egypt for a while because the king of Israel is going to try to get them. And he's going to harass a great number of people trying to get to them. So they're going to have to leave their community, run away, and basically live as refugees for a while. And then when they come back, right, what does this gospel tell us? Gospel is about the time Jesus is 12 years old. Apparently he's a little uppity at that point. Who'd have thought? And they're going to go to Jerusalem, and they're going to leave without him for a couple of days. Talk about the most panic moment any parent could have, right? Like, where's my kid, right? Keep going forward in the story. There's this passage where we talks about where Mary and some of Jesus' brothers come, and they're like, we're here to collect you because, Jesus, we think you've gone out of your mind. There's going to be a time when Mary thinks her boy's gone insane. And let's not forget that Mary's going to be there. Mary's going to be there at the cross. This is the blessing that Mary's signing up for. And yet Mary, in all her amazing faithfulness, not only claims it, but right here claims it as a blessing. If you kind of keep reading, there's this thing we have called Mary's Magnificat. That's the next thing that's in there. And it's this amazing, basically, song or psalm, or however you want to think about it, that Mary is basically thankful to God for the opportunity that she's been given. And throughout the story of Mary's life, throughout the Gospels, we're never given the clue. Sure, she's going to have concern about her son, as any mother would. Somewhere in here, Joseph just disappears from the story. We don't know what happens to that guy. But Mary's going to continue to be in the story, continue to be in Jesus' life, continue to see what Jesus is doing, continue to have concern for him as any mother would, but never once does she go back on the idea that what she's living through and what Jesus is living through is anything less than a blessing. Jesus, Mary claims the blessing, even though it's hard. And I think that's one of the things that we have to remind ourselves all the time. Sometimes the blessings in life that we need to claim most often are the ones that are actually fairly difficult. We have this idea that somehow blessings come in this form of making things easy, when the reality is the best blessings, the most amazing blessings, the blessings that, frankly, yes, my children are, and any children are, they're both amazing and they will also mess up your life, right? You're going to have to adjust. You're going to have to change. It's going to make life more difficult in some ways so that you can experience the blessing in the other ways. You're going to have to sacrifice. Mary will have to sacrifice. Jesus has to sacrifice so that not only Mary and Jesus can have the blessing, but we can all have it too. Mary claims the blessing even though it's going to be hard, even though of everything that it comes with. She claims it as a blessing anyway, and moves forward. And today, many times we are still called to do the same thing. So I have two very, very quick stories. One is about a young man named Cornell. Cornell was born in Romania, and Cornell was born without the bottom half of either of his arms, and with one leg that was very, very messed up. And he was born in a poor part of Romania, and the doctors and the parents didn't really know what to do with him, didn't know how to deal with him. There wasn't any way to deal with him, so they took him away and they put him in an orphanage and didn't expect him to last very long once he got there, because that tends to be what happens. Now, while he was there and early in his time there, a couple named Doreen and Ken show up as missionaries from England to work in the orphanage. And it's there that they encounter Cornell. And they don't, honestly, in the beginning, have much more hope than anybody else does. And they didn't go there looking to take on a child. They just went to go and look to help. And they were going to volunteer for a while, then they were going to go back home. But there was something about this kid that they found compelling. There was something about the situation that they just couldn't let go. And so they ended up bringing Cornell back to England where he gets some medical treatment, and throughout many, many touch-and-go surgeries and everything else, eventually kind of comes through it and continues to grow and mature to the point at which, I think in this picture, he's about 12 years old. By the time he was 12, he had participated in a number of things to raise money and awareness for orphans back in Romania, including one thing that I thought was actually really amazing. When he was 6 years old, he participated in this event where he rode his tricycle for 5 miles in laps around a park, raising money to send money back to the orphanage and the series of orphanages that he came from. Eventually, with the blessing of his birth parents, these British parents actually did legally adopt him, and he is legally their son today, though he remains in contact with both his birth parents and his new adoptive parents. Now, there's another story I want to tell real quick. This woman's name is Angela. And in 2013, Angela was 30 years old, and she was elected to the city council in a medium-sized town in Spain, which is not in and of itself exemplary. Younger people get elected to city council all the time. What's exemplary about Angela is Angela has Down syndrome. And what's even more exemplary about this is in Spain at the time, in 2013, at the time that she was elected, there were laws in place in Spain that basically kept people from Down syndrome from even being able to vote, let alone participate in this way. And she decided that she needed to be a voice and wanted to be a voice for people that she felt weren't being heard, people like her. So she got herself elected to city council and was that voice and has worked since then to change some of the rules about how folks in her situation are treated. What's amazing about both of these stories is if you read their words, if you read interviews they've done, if you hear about the stories and the people who talk about them, they certainly and absolutely talk about the challenges. They talk about the challenges of growing up the way they did and facing what they needed to face. But they never talk about it in terms of it being a burden, right? They never talk about it in the terms of being a burden. It was hard work. There were things to be done, but it was never that way. And in fact, both of them, and these are just two of hundreds of stories I found, both of them actually talk about it constantly over and over and over again as a blessing. The blessing of being able to see the world a little differently than everybody else does. The blessing of being able to sympathize because you've gone through it, what other people are going through. And the blessing it is that they found a place to have a voice, to speak and bring attention to those things that other people aren't speaking and giving attention to. They claimed the blessing. It doesn't mean the work wasn't hard. It doesn't mean they didn't have to face things that most of us will never have to face. It doesn't mean there wasn't adversity to overcome, but they claimed the blessing in it anyway. And I think that's what God calls us to do. Blessings don't always make life easier. Sometimes they make it more complicated. But again, it's usually relative. One person's blessing, what one person loves and thinks is great, is often not what other people think of. One of the best examples of this I ever had was when I was working as a consultant, and I had a contract in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Exciting place. So this is Fort Lee. It's right off the George Washington Bridge, and actually I worked in one of those buildings and then kind of right in the north center, right there. And I remember talking with a woman who was working there, and she was just like, and I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time, and she had grown up her whole life in this part of the world, and she just went off one day, and she's like, I don't understand where you live. Like, I don't understand how you live there, right? Like, I don't understand how that even works, right? Like, I can get in my car, and I can be in Manhattan in 5 minutes, and I can be here and here and there and there. It's like, what do you even do in those places? And of course, I'm in my head thinking, you live here. I live, next picture, here. Why would you not want to live here? We don't, we got a couple of freeways, but we got mountains and trees and fresh air and animals and all kinds of stuff. Honestly, once you cross the Mississippi River east, I don't know what on earth people over there are doing.
Like, why would you live over there? Right? She could only see the blessings of where she lived, which is good. You should see the blessings of where you live. She could only see the blessings of where she lives and the burdens of where I lived. And frankly, I could only see the burdens of where she lived. I'm like, this traffic is terrible, says the guy who lives on I-25 now. And I could see the blessings where I lived. It doesn't mean there were compromises. It doesn't actually mean that one's any better than the other. But at the end of the day, we get to choose what we focus on. And that's funny thing is that's come up every time. When we moved out of Ohio and moved back to Montana, everyone looked at us like we had three heads. Like, why would you want to live in Montana? And we're like, why would you want to stay in Ohio? I don't understand. We have to claim the blessings that are around us. We have to claim the opportunities that God has put into our lives. We have to recognize that just because we've been given a blessing doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy. And in fact, the biggest blessings sometimes come with some pretty hard work attached. That is what we learn from Mary. That is what we learn from her story and what she went through so that we could all be given the blessing of getting to know this person that we now call Jesus. We are all blessed by what Mary did. We're all blessed by what she took on. And the amazing thing is, Mary, who was the one doing all the work, understood it to be a blessing too. So this Christmas, this season of preparation, as we prepare for the coming of Mary's son, what blessing do you need to claim? What thing do you currently look at and go, I'm not sure about? What thing do you currently regard maybe even as a burden that God may be trying to bless you with? Because God works in all things. He works through the easy things and God works through the hard things. He works through the things that are right in front of us and the things that are hard to find. God is in the blessing business. That's what this whole story is about, from the very beginning to the very end. God wants to bless God's children. The challenge for us is to find them and to claim them. What blessing do you need to claim? Amen.